Okay, did anybody else get any serious Castlevania flashbacks when watching the trailer for this film? I mean, think about it. If you switch out Luke Evans and Charles Dance with Robert Carlyle and Patrick Stewart, you pretty much have the film version of Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Now, I know people have been complaining about this film, saying that it doesn't handle the character of Dracula very well. Well, this is Universal we're dealing with. They don't exactly have a flawless track record when it comes to them handling their monster movie properties. And really, vampires at this point have pretty much had any possible shred of dignity ripped away from them by popular culture, so there's no real point in going in expecting anything of any major artistic value here. I mean, I came in expecting schlock, and I basically got something slightly above the level of schlock. Slightly. If you couldn't tell by the intro, I had very low expectations going into this film. I mean, the one thing everybody said was that Universal and Legendary were effectively giving Dracula the superhero treatment. And really, that's pretty much what's happening here. This film is an origin story that kind of draws inspiration from the mythology surrounding Vlad Tepes, best known as Vlad the Impaler. To me, it looks like they were pretty much going out of their way to not have this Dracula be like the other Draculas we've seen in the numerous films and other media he's been in. It felt like they were trying to make a clean break in order to tell the story that they wanted to tell. Looking at the story as a whole, there are some scenes and moments that don't make a lot of sense, as well as a few instances where they hastily introduce certain ideas, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Vlad pisses off the Turks, appeals to the creature that's living in the cave in the scary-looking mountain, and is pretty much given the powers of a vampire with the caveat that if he survives 3 days without sucking blood, he'll turn back to normal. And you can pretty much figure out how the story ends from there. While I personally would have wanted the film to kind of lead into the events of the novel or even some of the adaptations Universal has done in the past, given the kind of story they're trying to tell here, I'm kind of glad they didn't in hindsight. It probably would have really just come across as forced and really have been seen as a desperate moment of pandering to fans of the classics. Where this film manages to shine is on the technical front. It has a nice sense of atmosphere that comes across in its overall set design and visual effects. It has its dark and gothic set pieces, and also takes cues from 300 when it comes to how the Turkish army looks and acts on screen. The visual effects themselves are actually pretty well produced. They look pretty convincing. The only times where they really look silly isn't really because there's that lack of polish, but it's just more of a case that what's happening in the story, what's happening in the script, is just so silly you can't take it seriously. It's not the effects themselves that look bad, it's just more or less what's actually happening in the story. Now, what doesn't help this film is the fact that a lot of the cool moments were basically in the trailer. A lot of the cinematography was trailer bait, where they would basically shoot stuff that's going to specifically look good in the trailer, and given that most people have already seen the trailers, it loses a bit of its impact. As for the acting, Luke Evans does a pretty good job with the material given. Again, it's not the Dracula that we're all familiar with. If anything, this is a version of Dracula that's probably more in line with how the Romanians remember Vlad Tepes, because in Romania he's hailed as a hero, as the guy who effectively kept the Ottoman Empire from expanding westward, and so this film kind of decides to depict him as a leader who's burdened by the responsibilities and the guilt that comes from the fact that he just effectively started war with the entirety of the Ottoman Empire. Overall, the film's not perfect, and it has some genuinely silly moments, but it was also really fun to watch. You just have to remember to check your brain at the door. This is kind of like going in to watch a cheesy 80s action film. If you go in with that mindset, you'll have a good time. So really, if you enjoyed films like Van Helsing, Underworld, anime films like Vampire Hunter D, or if you're a fan of the Castlevania franchise, then you'll probably have a good time with this film. If you're expecting something on the level of Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of Dracula, on the other hand, then you will be disappointed. There's not a lot of artistic depth here. This is kind of in line with some of Legendary's other works, like Pacific Rim, where it's more about the spectacle, about the effects, just kicking back and watching cool stuff happen on screen. It's not really focused on telling a super serious story. It's popcorn entertainment. Plain and simple. All of that said, Dracula Untold gets a 4 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.